Title: The Mirror of Shadows. Revised. Chapter 1. The Antique Shop. It was a rainy afternoon when Mark stumbled upon the dusty, forgotten antique shop nestled between two crumbling buildings in the heart of the old town. The flickering neon sign simply read, "Curiosities." Something about the place pulled him in, as if the shop itself whispered his name through the downpour. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and aged wood. Shelves groaned under the weight of relics from forgotten eras. Mark wandered aimlessly until his eyes settled on a large, ornate mirror tucked away in a shadowy corner. Its frame was carved with strange symbols, and the glass, though dusty, seemed unnervingly pristine. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with milky eyes, appeared from nowhere. "Ah, the Mirror of Shadows," he rasped. "It chooses its owner, not the other way around." Despite the cryptic warning, Mark bought the mirror and brought it home, unaware of the darkness he'd invited into his life. Chapter 2. Reflections. At first, the mirror seemed like nothing more than an antique curiosity. But soon, Mark noticed subtle differences. His reflection didn't always mimic his movements perfectly. Sometimes it lagged behind, or worse, it moved when he was perfectly still. He dismissed it as stress or lack of sleep, but the anomalies grew. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, whispers echoed in empty rooms, and the mirror seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Late one night, Mark awoke to the faint sound of tapping. He followed the noise to the living room where the mirror stood. His reflection was there, staring back, but it wasn't him. It smiled when he didn't, its eyes gleaming with malevolence. His heart raced, but a dark fascination rooted him in place. Chapter 3. The Doppelgänger. Mark became obsessed with the mirror. He spent hours watching his reflection, trying to catch it in the act. Days passed in a blur of paranoia and fear. The reflection seemed to mock him, moving just out of sync enough to unsettle his fragile mind. Then, it happened. His reflection stepped out of the mirror. It was him, but not. The doppelganger had his face, his voice, but its eyes were wrong, empty and cold. It moved with unnatural grace, a predator in human skin. "You've been looking into me," it whispered. "Now I'll look out through you." Mark fought, but the entity was stronger, faster. It overpowered him, dragging him towards the mirror. His screams echoed as he was pulled through the glass into a world of darkness and shadow. Chapter 4. The Other Side. The world beyond the mirror was a twisted reflection of his own, familiar yet grotesque. The sky was a swirling void, the ground cracked in bleeding shadows. Echoes of tormented souls screamed in the distance. Buildings stood like hollow carcasses, their windows gaping like empty eyes. Mark wandered this nightmare, desperate to find a way back. He encountered others trapped there, their faces distorted, their minds broken. They warned him, the mirror doesn't just reflect, it hungers. Meanwhile, in the real world, the doppelganger lived Mark's life. It wore his skin, spoke with his voice, but behind the facade, it spread darkness. Friends and family noticed subtle changes, a chilling coldness in his gaze, a sadistic edge in his words. His once kind demeanor eroded into something cruel and manipulative. Chapter 5. The Fight for Freedom. Mark discovered a hidden truth. The mirror was ancient, a relic from a forgotten cult that worshipped shadow entities. The only way to escape was to shatter the mirror from the inside, but doing so came at a price. His soul would be bound to the mirror forever, but it would free the others trapped within and banish the doppelganger. Desperate, Mark confronted the mirror's heart, a pulsing, shadowy core surrounded by the twisted remnants of other souls. Their distorted faces whispered pleas and curses, their agony etched into the very fabric of this dark realm. With a scream of defiance, he drove a shard of glass into the core. The mirror shattered. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. Mark awoke on the floor of his apartment, the mirror in pieces around him. His body was weak, his mind fragmented, but he was free. Or so he thought. Reflections in every surface seemed to watch him. His shadow moved when he didn't. And sometimes, when he looked closely, he saw his doppelganger still smiling, waiting for another chance. His mind teetered on the edge of sanity, haunted by echoes of the shadow realm. Epilogue. The antique shop was gone, as if it never existed. But the mirror's shards remained, scattered and forgotten, waiting for the next curious soul to pick them up. After all, mirrors don't just reflect, they remember. And sometimes, they reach back. The end.